Yeah. You always look kind of bored, Shane. You look like,
Yeah, I think I've heard that most of my life. This is just how I look.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you say something, Shane? Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People always project their own things onto you, and when you're a bit of a blank canvas like you are, a lot of projection would go on, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe, I guess so. Yeah, everybody projects, don't they? So, yeah, probably right about that. Yeah. I like talking just like everybody else. Um, just comes at the right time, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I was reading somewhere. I was only kind of a couple of sentences I read somewhere about people in Iceland or somewhere up in the Arctic of Scandinavia. Uh, it's not part of the culture to have small talk. They just don't know about small talk. When kids go to school, they have to actually teach them that people in English have small talk.
Right.
Maybe you've got some of those genes in you. You just
Yeah,
uh,
I'd say so. I've had to learn how to small talk. See, if I come to a group like this, I figure that nobody really cares, but um needing to go to work, that's definitely taught me to small talk. And I don't know, I guess people do it because they feel uncomfortable with one another, right?
probably,
Because
yeah,
like you, I guess you're in one another's presence, nobody says anything, and then you both start internally projecting, right? And imagining what's going on.
yeah, yeah.
So the small talking alleviates that, and then you can get onto the same page thinking about small things that won't bother anybody, like what's the weather today and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
what
yeah.
else do people like to talk about? Um,
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't tumble over into politics.
yeah,
Yeah, because with the real talk, we start to reveal ourselves, don't we? So the small talk keeps it all neatly closed off.
yeah, that's right. And so most of small talk, it's just doesn't go anywhere compared to deep conversations. So I like the Icelandic culture sounds good then. Um,
Mm.
do they also never pretend smile as well? That's another thing that
That
has
probably
always
goes
annoyed me.
along with it too. Yeah,
Does
yeah,
it? Yeah. Oh, see,
yeah,
maybe I got a bit of Icelandic in me. I don't know. Because that's always bothered me, like faking up a smile.
yeah, yeah.
Always have struggled to do that one. But it seems to get you in trouble. Like if you don't do it, people will start complaining. Um, I think the last excuse I came up with, some of my heritage is Italian, and I think my mum had told me that like some ancestral photographs or area, like on their um in their wedding photos, they didn't smile or something like that. I don't know if that's true because I haven't seen the photos, but I started talking about that and saying, oh, even this is my culture, you know, it's my culture not to smile because then that gives you a good excuse. People won't argue against that, right?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I think I heard somewhere once that it wasn't until about the 1960s even that people started to smile in photographs. Before that, they didn't do it.
Oh, okay. So it's just a
Yeah,
time period thing then.
it's a time thing. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Don't, yeah,
yeah, but
that's always weirded me out. Like I understand why people do it because then again, it's a projection. You see the photo, you see the smile, you think happy, it's a happy time. But no, like nobody looks in one place like that and all smiles. Like imagine if you
yeah,
walked
yeah.
in, if you walked into a room and everybody looked at you and like smiled like that,
You'd
you'd
wonder,
be
wouldn't
either be
you?
extremely lucky or you'd be in big fucking trouble. Like,
You get right out of there again.
yeah,
Yeah, you think, whoa, this is weird.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, cultural norms are really interesting, Like I think it was probably a bit, and it wasn't until, maybe the 40s or 50s that they decided that pink was for boys and for girls rather, and not boys. It used to be the other way around. So
Mm,
it used to be girls were blue and boys were pink up to a certain point, and then somehow or other it
really.
switched around. Yeah, there's a lot of cultural norms that are quite weird. Yeah.
This is all along the lines of like this week I've been listening to some different people talking about conditioning, like, what your conditioning is from where you're raised. Um, which has been interesting. And then as I go throughout my day, I think about that. So it sort of helps me to like crack out of the shell a tiny bit in my daily activities, thinking about, you know, um, how could how could I possibly do this moment differently? Or it allows you to have the realization that you might be able to do this moment now differently.
Mm.
It's that thought of challenging conditioning that is often this week been making me think about that. It's interesting. And then like wondering what is the conditioning? Like how deep does it go? And I guess actually it's almost like a pointless conversation in a way because it's just like everything really
Yep.
is your programming. And I guess you discussed that a little bit here when people have started talking about free will and things like that. It's all part of the same conversation, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. And there's some inbuilt contradictions there as well. Yeah. So when we're free of that, or as much as we can be free of that conditioning, doesn't mean that we don't still do those things. But it just means that we're not doing them out of duty, or we're not doing them unconsciously, uh,
Mm,
out of habit, kind of thing. That
yeah.
there's that thing. If we, I mean, as a kid, of course, I always wanted to challenge those things, and so I would do things in the opposite direction often, just
Mm.
to prove a point. Well, I mean, that's just as much locked into it as the people who obey it all the time. Yeah.
It's like the next step up though. Because you have to go to the next step to be able to think, to recognize that you can challenge it. And then yeah, I guess so. I'm just thinking about this as you say it. So, because I do that as well, like like do things to challenge them. So, if that's still conditioning, is that just like the conditioning of being a rebel or something?
Yeah, well, it gets tricky, and it gets much more sophisticated, or rather complex than just that. I mean, firstly, as you say, the first step up is to recognize that this is a culturally programmed way of behaving, um, and then having to break it, having to challenge it, still means that you're still actually hooked into it, even though, so it's like you're not free of it. until it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, because if you didn't care, then you just wouldn't care about breaking it or not breaking it.
That's right. You could go either
Yeah.
way. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I often speculate that that's where the word liberation comes from, being liberated from the compulsion to be a certain way. I don't know. I just imagine that that might be the case. Mm.
Um, I've been listening to David Parrish a lot, probably over the last month. He's got like a Zen channel, I guess. I guess that's what I would call it. Um, but he talks a lot about he he gives a message with the language talking about personality a lot, as in you are talking a lot about you are not the personality, as in you are not the self, you are the
Mhm.
awareness of the self, like all of that. Um, I find the way that he talks about it in using that word personality helpful to think about it in that, just using that word.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Personality. And again, we have to kind of drop down a level to to realize that there are, how can I put it, that there are propensities to be a certain way. And in the same way as the other thing, I guess if if we don't have a choice, oh, and I need to wash my mouth out with soap after saying that, don't I? But it's like if we are compelled, hmm, I don't know how to put this. I don't see personality as an issue. So personality is an expression of a whole lot of things that run from really deep to really superficial. And I guess even as we so-called wake up, there seems to be more possibilities about how to be than there was before.
Yeah, he's been making me think about like, I guess he sort of talks about detaching from your personality and then driving it consciously, and then all to do with all the conditioning as well. So I guess he's saying like if you can focus on yourself from the awareness state instead of being down here in the self, then and you realize that you're not your personality per se, then you actually sort of have some leverage to control it as in behave in different ways. I guess that's all it's saying.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that sounds okay to me. Yeah,
yeah. And so again, it's just been interesting to me to because when I listen to that kind of stuff, like it makes sense. And then moving away from my computer outside of the door is one thing of keeping that in my head. And I can sort of like start going throughout the day and it's like a this feels good and I can like play with that mentally. And then um interacting with others is like another whole level where it's like
yep,
really, really hard to
yeah.
do
You get
that.
sucked in really quickly, though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's that's where you, I don't know, in a way, that's where you can, because I've been seeing myself when I interact with other people as well. It's like, kind of funny in a way because I don't know, it seems quite different than I don't know how to say this. Like when I'm on my own, the input that I get from other people, like I guess I respond a lot from my normal personality just because it's like normal or something. And with some people, I will start to like if there's some people that I want to build more of a relationship with, or I have a higher level of trust, I will start to tell them more about things that people in this group and such would talk about. But I've noticed I'm like automatically like extremely guarded about how I'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, using the word spirituality is like, I feel like it's a really loaded term
Absolutely, I
that
agree. Yeah. Mm.
that'll get judged. So it's like, I have to like move around it and
It's interesting too, because one of the things that happens when you're with other people, the normal thing, and I experience this too, is that you tend to become unaware of yourself. You're just on automatic kind of thing, and you're
yeah,
so involved in the interaction that you don't even think of yourself. You don't realize what your physical stance is. You don't realize what you're saying even a lot of the time, unless something happens and you jump out into some objective, like you're saying awareness. I don't quite go along with awareness as a thing, but I know what you mean. That objective, looking at, watching what's going on, watching yourself. But you don't
mm,
normally do that when you're with other people. You can do it more easily when you're alone. You have that
yeah.
objective perspective. But when you're with other people, and it's interesting, we talk about recognizing that there's no self, but when you're on full automatic, there's no thoughts of self. There's no, we don't even realize that we're acting as if there is a self. We're just so involved in whatever is going on, which is a rather interesting one. So we can easily imagine that the ideal thing or something to do with being awake is that you're always able to watch what's happening. But I don't think that's the case. I think we imagine that it is the case, and we imagine that if we're in a state of peace or tranquility, that we're aware that we're in that state. And I don't think that's right either.
I know what you're talking about, like with those states. So what do you think is, can you tell us like when you say that you don't think that's right, what do you think is on what do you think is right? What do you think is there?
I've got no idea.
Or yeah, is it that's because another another speaker that I have been liking lately, her channel is called Suzanne Non-Duality. And I think I came across that some time ago, and it was one of those things where it was just like I listened to a tiny bit and then it was like I didn't really understand it. But I've been listening to that a lot lately, and one good thing is it's really been helping with my insomnia. Like I just put that on when I've been going to sleep. But I also listen to it when I'm not sleeping. And one of the things one of her themes is, I guess it's hard to describe, but it's just like nothing. Like she'll often talk about, there is none, no answers. I probably will say this incorrectly, but there's no like even within spirituality um and different traditions, like she's talking about that there are no um answers to anything, I guess. I don't know how to
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
it. It's
Oh, I
sort of
get it. I get that. I fully grok
yeah, and that
what you're saying. Yeah, yeah.
that yeah, that kind of makes sense, and that's really interesting because I think that's really breaking down that conditioning stuff.
Mm.
I guess because one of the things I remember was like even in um like spiritual traditions, she was talking about people still being, conditioned to sit a certain way during meditation or whatever it is that that tradition is suggesting that you do to get into a certain emotional space or whatever you want to call it. Um, I don't know. I just find that interesting to listen to. It feels very freeing in a sense, I suppose, to be like cutting all these different things away. Um,
Yeah, that's a particularly hard one to kind of put into words.
mm,
So, what I say things like we discover that we can have questions that don't require an answer. And they don't require an answer because there is no answer, because whatever we come up with is a construct. So we call that an answer. So who knows where it fits, or if it fits, doesn't necessarily fit. So there is this really weird situation where we can say, I don't need to know anything, or I know all that I need to know. And now that's a tricky one. I know all that I need to know. A lot of people who are not on this path, or at least, or anyway, people who are not on this path would immediately interpret that as saying, well, I know everything, which of course is exactly the opposite of what I'm saying when I say I don't need to know anything because I know there is nothing to know. So it's like it's kind of gets really weird to communicate that one. But there's a sense of um, how can I put it? There's a sense of if I need to know something, I'll be shown,
mm.
kind of thing.
When you say I don't need to know anything, like to me, I understand that I relate to that because I relate to that through after having learned many things during my life, and then just getting to the point where it's like none of this really seems to be helping me that much in continuing to pressurize myself to always continue to learn new things. So I now know that I don't really need any new information.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't need to seek it out. Like that's what you just,
Yes.
isn't it? It'll
Yeah.
come to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Like still happy to learn things, but is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it says it when you said the word information, knowledge and information, that becomes. I mean, I've forgotten more than I've ever learned. I've learned lots and I've forgotten it all, and and if I need it, it'll come back to me.
Hmm.
But I don't remember what it is that I've forgotten. There's so much there.
Hmm.
So yeah, dead information is useless unless you're in a situation where it's helpful. So, and of course, in our daily life, we're always only ever in the situation where at maximum, one thing might be helpful. And even that would only be a transitory thing. So, yes, so the whole idea of gathering or collecting information or knowledge is a bit crazy. But that doesn't preclude learning. Learning's a big part of this, but it's an adaptable thing. Learning happens and is used and is gone, like like experience. It sounds like I'm just waffling now. Yeah, help me, guys. What's Tyler? What's your idea about having answers?
Are you
Are we?
asking me for an answer?
Yeah, I'm asking you for an answer. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I'll reframe the question.
Well, I think when Suzanne says there are no answers, she's not asserting that there's no answers. It's just like she can't talk about what there is, right? She can only talk about what there isn't. So it gets really hard to talk about. And there are no answers is, well, if there are no answers, Shane, then why do you keep listening to this shit?
I don't think I said that there was no answers. Or if I did, then it doesn't matter. But that's what I was trying to say that I was getting from her. To try to put it more simply, I think that she was just saying nothing matters, literally at all. No opinion or feeling about anything. I guess it is a bit scary to think along those lines because it's sort of like saying not caring is freedom, which is true. I know there's things that I definitely want to care about still. Certain people, whatever it is. But I guess I find it really interesting to listen to that. Like I said, it feels freeing to listen to that. Um, and again, with the conditioning, I think it makes me think about what's going on in my head. What things do I care? What do I care about? Like, what do I want to keep there? You know?
So you can decide what to keep caring about.
Yeah, I can do that.
Well, I'd say if you care about some things or some people, you don't have to want to care about them because you already do, and you can't just not care about them. It's the
Yeah.
other way around. Works both ways. And I also don't think that she's asserting that nothing matters. It's, I think it's closer to nothing can matter.
It's all okay.
Because it's not like I know nothing. It's more like I can't know. You know, because if she's saying that nothing matters, then she can have an argument with someone who says that things matter. But you can't, because it's like the mattering isn't a thing.
So if we approach that from the side a little bit, we might say that meaning and purpose are constructs. So they're purely conceptual. And caring and mattering can fall into that in the same way. So if you have a certain relationship, say, when you're conceptually considering that relationship, you could say, I care and it matters. But that doesn't mean that caring and mattering exist as a thing. It's just a way of describing something that you would only do if you wanted to communicate to yourself or to others. So meaning and purpose and caring and mattering are all concepts. They don't actually relate to any actual experience, but they can be used to describe an experience at a superficial level, sure. I loved what you said there, Tyler. That was really I'd never heard it put that way before, but that about answers, and it's already gone. It's already slipped out of my mind, but I remember that I liked what you said. And it was just a switch in perception that you approached it from the other angle, and that made sense. Good. So socially, if you said, "Oh, well, I don't care," that has very strong social connotations. If I do care, it also has strong social connotations. So if you did what the Conservatives would do and say, well, don't you care about your family? It's like they're pushing you in a corner. Well, you say, well, of course I do. I've got to, So therefore they say, well, therefore caring is real. Well, that's not logical, but it's the way society would approach it, eh? If I imagine that when my wife dies, that there won't be a large amount of grief, and there might be a period of sadness, but then pretty quickly that'll be gone too, or at least it'll recede into the background, maybe to be provoked at certain moments with certain conditions, but nevertheless, and would that then mean that I don't care? I love my dog, but I've told my dog many times that if it gets sick, it's going to get put down. I'm not going to spend $10,000 to extend its life by 3 months. It doesn't mean I don't care. But it's kind of, so this is social implications for these things that we're talking about that are the biggest hooks that we've got. So we've got to be really careful that when people say that's real, for us to realize that it's only real at a conceptual level.
I find it so interesting to talk about these ideas like caring relative to when we talk about conditioning, or like Fetter's 4 and 5, where you've got some emotional triggers of either like wanting something or resisting something that's happening. That was easy to understand in terms of like I'm conditioned to respond in a certain way and have certain reactions, and you can see how you can be conditioned to follow a certain set of rules or have beliefs. Things like caring, I'm finding right now really fascinating to think about, because I'm trying to I'm trying to understand how it's actually different. Like if I really break down saying that I care about my dog, what what does that actually mean? Is it that I like, does it all come back to this self that I prefer the emotions and the sensations that I get when I observe her being comfortable and healthy and fed, or laying next to me and I'm petting her. Like, so much of that feels like it's coming back to this thing that I consider my conditioned self and its preferences, and the things that it that it wants, and the things that, like, it if I say I don't want my dog to be sick, or I don't I care and I don't want her to be hungry, and I don't want her to be injured, and I want her to be comfortable. Is that just because I prefer the experience and the sensations and the emotions of her being healthy and comfortable? Is it all just really about this me that isn't
Well,
there?
no, but that me that you're talking about, that doesn't exist
Right.
when you're sitting and the dog's next to you and you're patting that dog, and there are pleasant sensations, emotions in the body. That's it. Why extend it and go, that must be me that's experiencing that?
Totally agree. Yep.
Yeah. So there is that experience of that. Now, then we get off into concept land again and say, well, is that because I have a preference for that? Well, it's pretty obvious that you do have a preference for pleasant, and the opposite of preference for unpleasant. That's the way our body works. That's the way our whole being works. How much of that is conditioned? Well, it does play a part in it. We have a lot of preferences that are conditioned preferences. We have a lot of, what's the opposite of preference? We have a lot of repulsion for stuff that is also conditioned. You know, our fear of spiders and snakes and dog shit is all conditioned stuff, you know. You know, the reality of it is that it's we have unpleasant sensations when those things are in our life.
Was this earlier in the conversation, it reminded me again of an analogy between um, our brains, our thinking mind, our conditioning, and AI like ChatGPT, and that everything that ChatGPT can do, it has been conditioned to do. It can't provide answers unless it has been given information that enables it to predict what it thinks is the best, the next best word to use, and how to put together a sentence. And
But AI does
I,
learn. It does learn. So
right,
the programming is only up to a certain point, and then there is discovery that it makes by putting two things together in a way that's not programmed, and then getting feedback that is appropriate. Right. So here's an
yep,
interesting one. The Tesla, they were up to 300,000 lines of code heaps and heaps of little apps, one to control the steering, another one to control the lights, another one to control the wipers, etc., etc., and all to do with learning the full self-driving process that they were doing, right? 300,000 lines of code over about 18 years or something. It was a long time for them to develop that. And they were getting pretty good at it. And then they built a supercomputer, and then they forever and ever, every time somebody took control of a Tesla car, it would send back to Tesla via the internet um, a video of what went on. And so in the end, what they did was that they just fed the artificial intelligence pictures, movies of people driving. That's all they did. They didn't tell it anything else. They just fed it images, movies of people driving. And in less than 12 months, it was doing a better job driving the car than what 300,000 lines of human created code was doing. So it learned how to drive by watching people driving, just doing that. So now here's an interesting switcheroo. Do we learn how to do things in the same way that artificial intelligence learned how to do things? We do. We do.
Yeah.
We learn how to, by watching people. We learn, as a kid, we watch our parents and our peers behave, and we develop mannerisms that mimic them because that's what we've been watching and that's what we've learned. So rather than have artificial intelligence trying to be like us, are we trying to be like artificial intelligence?
I think about that when, like with ChatGPT, and people say, well, it's not really intelligent. All it's doing is taking all of the inputs that it has received, all of its conditioning and training, and it's just regurgitating some
Uh,
combination of all of its inputs.
and if you
So it's
told
not
them that
really
they were doing the
intelligent.
same thing, they'd want
Yeah,
to
I'm
hit
like,
you.
how it's like how are we doing anything different?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I've been conditioned, I've had conditioning of inputs, visual, auditory, all these sensations that my body has been collecting for 45 years.
Yeah.
I'm pretty damn trained to
Yeah.
think in certain ways, to have habits, and it's been helpful in this, I guess, awakening for me because you were talking about how you would think it, one way that you think about the term liberation. To me, part of it is also freedom, like freedom to be aware, or the freedom in being aware of your conditioning, and that in your moment to moment experience, you can see the conditioning happening and do something different.
Yeah. It's not even that you have to do something different. It's just like it's just, do we do something out of training or duty? So that's a bit different to training. Or do we do something because it's simply the most appropriate thing to do? And it could be exactly the same thing, but done for these different reasons.
And I
And when,
just,
yeah, go on.
no, sorry, I thought that was finished, but if you've got something else,
No,
don't
you
want to
jump
interrupt.
in. Yeah.
Just going back to the conversation about speakers and Suzanne, who spent a long time on her Zoom calls, so I'm really familiar with her, and she's great. However, I have this whole dilemma about speakers, about I think when you have a glimpse, or even in that first awakening, when you see the ultimate, kind of like see right through to the end, and then start speaking from it in the absolute way. And what did I want to say? Yeah, I picked up on what Tyler said there, which I really liked. I think you said it's not that there aren't any answers, it's that there can't be. Did you say that, Tyler? Pretty much.
I think kind of, but now I rephrase it to say that, yeah, an answer isn't a thing.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so listening to speakers who, I think, I don't know this and I don't know what's projection and but I'm wary of some speakers because I feel they might only be speaking from the absolute. So they've clearly seen the ultimate, the ultimate paradox, that there's everything and no thing, that there's no real person, that there's no one in the body, there's no boundaries, and this kind of thing, and speak on that. And then, but can only go so far with someone because they've stopped at that point and they've not really looked into the shadow or anything that's coming up, because they're staying, Shane talks about this, in that perspective and referring back to that all the time. And I know the reason I say this is because I did that for a long time. So it might be me that's projecting it onto them, but they're still doing that. But it is a kind of difficult point for me because people pop up on my YouTube and I'm very attracted to them because they're talking from the absolute. And I loved being in that for a long time, and it seemed very simple. But the problem comes then when you're in a relationship, or in relationships generally, and you're dealing with people in real time. So say with Suzanne, if you're bringing something up, she's a really good listener and she listens, but her feedback is generally, that's completely understandable. I understand that. So there's no movement there, and then back to the absolute. And that's not criticism of Suzanne. It might sound like it, I really like Suzanne, and but I don't know if you can get stuck in that and then never really and then just go on YouTube and talk about that all the time in a way a presentation would be. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, it's like somebody that's operating from that place can lose touch with humanity.
Yeah, it can almost be, and the dilemma is, because I sometimes want to go back to it, and I question, is it a belief system that they're running on, a new one, that is obviously, there's a lot of truth in it, but but it's not the finished. There isn't a finish. Sorry, there isn't a finish, but it's not.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. It's important. You know, yeah. And I often wonder how people take me when I talk, because I imagine that I'm talking in a way that sounds like I know, and yet I know that I don't, you know, but when I talk, that's the way it comes out, because I'm kind of 100% invested in whatever it is, I guess. But when we're talking about this kind of stuff, it's like we're not in contact with real people and real experiences. That's the thing. We need to always come back to a daily life. This in our life on a daily basis is where the rubber hits the road, and that's what we need to bring it back to. So it's all very well to talk about the absolute and there is no thing and all of that kind of stuff, but it's just stories unless we experience it. And quite frankly, to get to that point of experiencing that, we've usually got to clear a lot of shit away, because it's all that shit that stops us from experiencing that stuff. And that's where I think the rubber hits the road, where all that shit is, and that's where my interest is for people.
Yeah, and I think that they seem to have clearly experienced it, and I think I clearly experienced it. So I suppose the dilemma for me is, should I, and there isn't a should, could I? Am I just going down rabbit holes if I don't just stay with that ultimate truth and keep the focus there, keep a little bit what Shane was saying actually, is listening to this guy, and then he keeps in focus and then he goes out and in real day. But it's not focusing on the awareness, because that in itself is two. There's the awareness and then you're aware of something, but focusing on this, the absolute, that ultimately there isn't anything.
That's
Ultimately,
right.
there isn't
And
anything.
you can tell yourself you're going to keep focusing on this and watch what you're thinking, and that will last for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then you're lost in your thoughts again. That's the way life goes. You know,
So
no matter
say
what you say you're going to do, it's what actually happens that's the issue, or the where you know what, I don't know what to call it, but yeah, it's what actually happens that counts. What you
so
say
what?
you're going to do, what you think you should do, they're just stories that get in the road of what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm. So what if it's not? I'm not talking about telling yourself something like a mantra. There's nothing. There's it's more of a refocusing and coming out of the habitual conditioning
Yeah,
and
yeah.
neural pathways of what you've come
Yep.
to.
Okay, so you can't do that with willpower, but there are skillful ways that you can tweak that so that it's more likely to happen, right? So it's like, so an analogy is, if you want to see a lion, you got to put yourself in a place where there are lions. You know, you go to the zoo or you go to Africa or wherever there are lions, right? So if you want to be more aware of what your thoughts are saying, then you need to put yourself in the road of being aware of what your thoughts are saying. And so to do that is the one way that I make a big deal of is to, when you recognize that you were not watching your thoughts and now you are, you celebrate that moment where recognition happens, where realization happens. And then that's more likely to develop that way of doing it. So the same with anything. So you're going to develop new habits by putting yourself in the way of those things. That's
But I
all.
think
So
I'm talking about something completely different to what you're talking about, Vince. No disrespect.
yeah.
I'm talking about not changing anything or looking at your thoughts or having a method to look at your thoughts and laughing, or I'm looking at when I had what I call a first awakening, thoughts meant nothing to me. I didn't give a shit what I was thinking. I didn't give a shit what people, I don't know, maybe there was about that. But there was a knowing that thoughts didn't mean anything. Maybe I'd still get hooked up on some, but now
I get it. I get what you're saying. Yeah.
That's not strong in me now. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But for a long time, I felt I lived in, and I've talked about this many times and with you, Vince, in that ultimate place, and even spoke from it quite clearly and felt quite authentic. So this refocusing is not watching what you're doing. It's a remembering. It's a remembering, a refocusing back to the ultimate, or truth's not the best word, the absolute
Yeah,
truth.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Rather than looking at thoughts and just somehow.
Yep. So you might say there is a knowing of the possibility.
I think you already know it. I think it's already there. I think we're already awake all the time. It's the case, but we believe that we're not, because we're getting identified with thoughts and actions and things like that. But somewhere in us, there's a knowing, but it's overlooked. And it's orientating towards that. It's there's teachers that talk about this all the time, so I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, but that's their focus. They wouldn't go into past trauma or therapy or anything like that. It's like, if you stay in that, then everything just drops away. I don't know if you've come across that, Tyler, have you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay.
What are you referring to when you say the absolute?
Nothing really exists as real form. Has no substance.
That's the absolute?
Yeah. It appears as if it's real, but it's not.
But it's not real.
Well,
It's
that's
just that
that's the whole dilemma that I'm talking about speakers, because both seem to exist. So there's the nothing, which nothing exists, and then there's the everything, of seeming to exist as real, form seeming to exist as real. But really, when you break it down into atoms and quarks and all that business, there's nothing there. So it's only seeming, like an illusion. So the absolute would be emptiness, space, nothing. There's nothing. It's a play on a screen, seeming to look like real life and stories. And
But being an unreal play on the screen is just the other side of the coin as being reality.
yeah, so you have to step out of concepts for both of them. It's beyond concepts, so we can't talk about it. So I'm just using a word to, the absolute as a word to describe what can't be talked about. Because you can't talk about it, otherwise you put it into concepts and words and a structure.
But
And it
what do you mean by focusing on it? Because when you say you can focus on it, that it's making me think that you're referring to a thing within your experience that you can put attention towards.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That's why I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
No, that's a really good point. I like that. I suppose what I'm saying in realistically is listening, going back to listening to those teachers like I did, and then that recognition coming to the foreground more.
Recognition of what?
Of the awakeness that's already here.
What awakeness?
Yeah, but we're going to words again, Tyler. You can't.
No, but you're talking about it as if there's a thing in your experience that is here that you can orient towards, that you can focus on.
No, there isn't a thing. That's the absolute thing. There isn't a thing. There isn't a thing. But by looking for things in past experiences or future experiences, or a problem, or trying to solve or unravel or any of that, then we make it into a thing. But there's no thing to unravel or
Are you aware of the absolute or the absolute aware of you?
there isn't an awareness in it. There's no absolute. That's just my dilemma.
I don't understand the dilemma. The way you've just talked about things makes it sound like there's no dilemma.
I suppose the dilemma is then that things are coming up that I believe are real.
Such as?
Things from the past.
And then that makes you feel certain ways. And then
Yeah.
the dilemma is feel those ways or go to this whatever so I don't have to feel that way. Is that the dilemma?
I think when I was doing that a long time ago, and a lot of beliefs dropped away and clear seeing and whatever, what I'm talking about. And then I think feelings came up. And then there was a problem. However, now I think you can still yes, I think feelings are okay.
So what's the dilemma?
The dilemma is that makes me feel better listening to those people. In some ways.
Yeah,
I'm
and
more
that's
interested in who's having the dilemma more than the dilemma itself.
I mean, have you ever done anything for the goal of not feeling better?
I'm not sure, actually, to be honest. I don't really have an answer to that. It doesn't come up. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, sometimes things are just happening on their own, you know? There's just like almost no one doing it. Just nice in the flow. You know, just things just happening.
I mean, it sounds like to me you have emotions, and sometimes when they're not so nice, you do something to make the emotions nicer.
Yeah. But sometimes I also, like this morning, I was looking at what's abuse in my childhood and feeling it very heavy and dark. Writing about it, having a few insights. But at the same time, questioning. There's doubt in my mind at the same time, kind of there's doubt about doing that.
And what do you think you should be doing instead?
Listening to absolute teachings.
I mean, if you feel like shit, and you go sit down and you go write stuff about it, and then you try to glean insights so that you make it better, or next time you won't feel it as much. That's one thing you can do. And then the other is listening to speakers who talk about the absolute, and then you get to feel better also. So your dilemma is just, do I want to have chocolate cake or red velvet cake?
Are you saying that they're both bypassing or avoidance?
There's no such thing as avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're hungry, you'll eat.
Mm-hmm.
Is that avoidance? Is that bypassing hunger?
It isn't, but I can bypass with eating and then make myself ill. because I've had a food addiction. So if I'm trying to squash feeling, I'm not usually conscious of it, but afterwards I'll know that something was repressed because I've overeaten and made myself feel sick. Same with drinking. Taking a drug.
Yeah, ultimately, even this whole thing is about feeling better, right? It's about choosing the best flavor chocolate cake that you can like keep eating for your whole life.
That's very true, yeah. Which one do I do to make me feel better?
Yeah,
Whether
so
it's writing about childhood or watching, the question is, what do I do to, well, I suppose I'm looking at what do I do to set myself free?
so what do I do to not feel this way when this trigger occurs in the future? And I mean, if you put the question like that, then I would say the answer is just to
What do I
feel.
do? Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. What do I do to not feel shit? Yeah. Yeah.
Then
And
I would
I have an idea, rightly or wrongly, that liberation would mean not that you wouldn't feel it, but that you would see it from a different perspective.
which would make it less shit.
Yeah, it would, because there won't be any personal, there won't be beliefs in it and personal, and it wouldn't be what I am. It wouldn't be anything. It wouldn't. There'd be an understanding. I don't know if understanding is the right word. You'd see it for what it was, without any suffering on top of it, any psychological suffering on top of whatever pain or.
So isn't this the elephant in the room? That you have experienced that quote non-dual state where none of this stuff existed, and now you believe that this stuff is in the road of you experiencing that again.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that again, and so a lot of people, it's been said, I've heard a lot of people say that you can stay in therapy for going around in circles and circles, or you can wake up. So there's a fear that I would be going around in circles, I suppose, missing the point.
Is going around in circles the new thing that is causing you to suffer?
Possibly, or feeling I am. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I like, there was a lot of insights this morning and kind of seeing through quite a few things. However, it didn't give that feeling of that aha moment or release, I suppose.
Who do you take yourself to be?
Pardon?
Who do you take yourself to be right now? Not from memory. Like right now. Who are you?
Just space.
How it feels to experience yourself.
There's sensations and there's space.
So you're actually experiencing that space now?
Sorry?
You are actually experiencing that space now?
Yeah, it's there a lot of the time, if not all of the time. The times that it does disappear is when I have chronic IBS and the pain takes over. Not only then, perhaps when I've been triggered. So I say, yeah, yeah, it's kind of there. It's kind of there, even with worry or.
So what your self is, am I right? If I'm getting what you're saying right, you're saying that yourself is what you experience when you're triggered, what you experience when you're in pain from the IBS. When you're suffering, you are a self. When you're not suffering, you're not a self. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's it. That's what I'll get rid of.
If only we had a guillotine for that one.
Yeah.
I'm curious about Tyler's question again. Like, so after all of this conversation, what is the dilemma to you?
I think Vince just hit it on the head there. And I thank you all for bringing me to this point of like the self reappearing, suffering and pain, and how that becomes liberated or see as I'm speaking, there's a me getting in the way, isn't it? The me that wants to do something about it, to make it come about, which Vince points out to me a lot, to do something to get rid of.
But if what you say, what just occurred to me then is the only place that you can imagine that you would be able to do something about it is when a self exists, and that's when you're in the pain or being triggered or suffering. So when you're not in that, there's no self to do anything and there's no need to do anything. But when you're in the pain, there is a self and there is a need to do something, or at least there's a desire to do something to fix it.
Yeah. And then so this morning when I am in it, let's say when I'm in that heavy fear and I sit with it and I'm looking at it and feeling it.
In an attempt to do something about it?
I'm not sure. No, I think it was pretty much this. I think sometimes it is, but I think this morning it was a bit like, let's just look at it. Let's just let it be here. But then I started writing and it went. I think I started writing and it went, and I got quite a lot out of the writing. But I think what's happening in those moments is there's this big doubt comes in. I don't know, something that don't want me to go down that road, or this is not working. I'm believing these kind of things. This is not working. This is the wrong track. You're going to be going round in circles.
So
And I don't
something
know.
working or not working, the right or the wrong track, that
Mm.
all says something, doesn't it? What do you think that says?
Well, it's a belief in right and wrong, isn't it?
And a belief that you can do something.
Mm. Yeah, I do think those two beliefs are there, are sticking points for me. Yeah.
I don't think this is really about a self at all. It's
Mm.
just, I mean, it's just there are feelings and you don't want to feel those feelings. So you're looking for a way to not feel those feelings, be it writing or listening to teachers or becoming liberated.
I
And
think Vince hit on something there. If I could just sit with that a minute, because that I think these two big beliefs, and I think that's what's underneath that I'd like to get to, is the beliefs that hold me in these places. And I think those two beliefs run quite big for me. That right and wrong, and that I can do something,
And
when
there's
ultimately
another.
I know there's no right and wrong, and I know that there isn't anyone, but in them moments, I'm believing that.
And what about another belief that if you were awakened, then you wouldn't experience those things?
Well, let's say that we're talking about seeing through beliefs of right and wrong, and I can do something. What I was actually doing was fine, but the belief of right and wrong, and that I can do something, is the
Yep.
sticking point. Is the sticking point
Yep.
to being
So,
free.
so if is it would it be possible for you to do exactly the same things, but without the reason for doing them, for the reason for doing them to be entirely different to the reason you did them this morning, but doing the same things? So instead of writing to make it go away or to find something out that would make it go away, you're just writing because writing happens, and maybe it just goes away because it goes away.
Well, that brings up something else for me that I'm seeing, is that I'm seeing feeling feelings and writing and going into past trauma as hard work. And there's a friction between, there's a story of like, that's hard work, and I've been in a lot of pain all my life. I want to have fun now. And what's the quickest way to get there? Do I have to really do all this to be free? Because the ultimate goal would be to fully live my life. And just feel that freedom that I did in the first awakening, where nothing kind of, it did matter, but it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It was real, but it wasn't. That paradox.
Yeah.
And this kind of drudgery of going into the past, and there's a bit of me that wants to, and it seems to be unlocking something, but then there's a bit of me that doubts that.
What if you've already done all of the work that is necessary? You've gone into and you've looked at and you've realized and you've seen enough already, and that what you're doing is just habitual. The continuation of it is just habitual. What if is that a valid question? What if you've actually already done enough, and that 5 minutes from now something will have switched?
Yeah, good question. What came up for me then is, I don't know if I'm more frightened of going into the pain and having problems than I am of fully being free and alive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bit like, and that came up this morning, because I was thinking about last days, I was thinking about just playing with, experimenting with, what if I didn't have all this meetings and Zooms and non-duality and teachings? What then? And that scares me a bit. Like, yeah, just scared of living without all that.
Right. Okay. So this is just another addiction.
Stop it, Vince. I don't like that. That means I have to do it up. I don't want to.
Well, it means you have to keep that
Stay with
pain
the
and
idea.
suffering. You have to keep that pain and suffering, otherwise you lose all of this, eh?
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
And you've got my permission and my encouragement to keep coming here even when you don't need to come here, which sounds hilarious to me. Why do you think I'm here?
Well, no, to be honest, I often don't need to, most of the time, or I don't need to watch teachings, but I just enjoy them. But
So what part of you needs to justify it with the pain and suffering?
um,
You don't have to answer that, but it's a great contemplation point, isn't it?
Well, I think it touches around. I was writing some beliefs down this morning about having to fit in, having to be like others, having to conform, kind of like.
Stuff that Shane was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So isn't it great that we've got this possibility of finding out stuff about ourselves that we've never known?
Or it's like getting to the bottom of some things, getting to the bottom of the beliefs and things.
Oh, you're working again. I'm here to play, not to work.
Yeah, yeah. You always mention this to me. Oh, you might be working on things. So there's a belief, isn't it? I've got to work on things.
Yeah, it's a big one. But it's all through our society. We've definitely that's a conditioned thing. You don't deserve unless you earn, etc.
So now all the beliefs are coming up that were kind of not there in that first awakening. It's like there is no purpose, there is no meaning, there is no direction, nothing to do, nowhere to go. There was such freedom with all that somehow I hit something and it felt like I turned back.
Hmm. So when you get it, or whatever the new version of it is that will turn up, it will have a much more solid foundation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ironically, it'll be because of all the work you've done that, that I'm saying you shouldn't do. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I enjoyed that.
Mm. Felt good here too. Yeah.
I'll continue working hard.
With that smile on your face, I hope. Yes.
Get somewhere. Yeah. Thanks for everybody else's questions as well. They're really good, really valuable.
There's a question in my head that keeps coming up. throughout this conversation. I'm not sure what to think about it, and I guess I just want to throw it out there to hear others' perspectives. And that is that it's this idea of like pain versus suffering, experience and not there's experiencing, and then there's suffering in that experience. And I think the question that I'm really getting at is there a problem with not wanting to suffer? I'll add a tiny bit of context. I feel like there's maybe a habit or a tendency in conversations like this for someone to express that they're suffering in a particular situation, and for someone to bring up, well, there is no suffering. There's no there is no person who's suffering. How can you be suffering? But to that person, suffering is happening. And I feel like part of what we're doing is seeing that experience and that suffering from a different perspective, so that the experience can remain as it is, but the suffering won't be there, or it won't sting as hard. And on one hand, I feel like it really came when you had mentioned elephant in the room, Vince. You weren't talking about this elephant, but this is what arose for me. And that is that it's almost like there's this stigma of not wanting to suffer. Is wanting to get rid of suffering a problem? Is it really a problem, or is it okay to not want to suffer? I guess is what I'm getting at.
I feel like it's the most important thing, really. I feel like that's why we all are here. If we didn't suffer and we said we don't want to suffer, we won't even seek anything or try to understand anything.
Yeah, I don't know that that's actually true for me. I'm here for the chocolate ice cream. And the suffering is wanting the chocolate ice cream and not having it. Yeah, but your question, Jeremy, is really loaded. There's a lot in that, you know. My first reaction was the not wanting or the concern about whether I should want or not want to avoid suffering is suffering in itself, isn't it? So if again, it's a one way to look at it. What I would immediately come to is the idea that we're overlaying experience with a story, and it's that story where all the suffering exists. So what you call suffering, the circumstances that are involved in that, the conditions that are involved that lead to an unpleasant experience, which I presume is what you're talking about, a version of an unpleasant experience that you're calling suffering. It seems to me, as humans, as human beings, the rubber on the road part means that we will have a preference not to feel that. That's going to be a physical preference as well as every other kind of preference that possibly exists. So whether we then overlay a story about right or wrong, that's kind of crazy. That just adds to the whole thing, doesn't it? So if there is this experience that I'd rather not experience because it's unpleasant or even painful or have whatever intensity it is, that's just the way it is. And really, that's not the actual point. It's our relationship to that is the point that we're talking about. So we can have this experience now. So when Anne was in that non-dual state, for want of a better way to put it, right, the same circumstances that now create suffering would not have created suffering because of the perspective that they was being viewed from. There may be the same amount of unpleasant sensation, but it was devoid of the desire to end it, the repulsion to it, or the desire to feel something different. It would be just noticed and observed as being there, and it would be all somewhat objective, the perspective about the whole thing. So back when my hand was hurting a lot and constantly, and I just use those words for the sake of communication, there was always that background pain, and I presumed, because I was only aware of it from time to time, but I presumed that it was always there, even though I wasn't aware of it. And so when I was aware of it and it was present, it felt quite weird to describe it as pain. But in a standard social setting, I would say, yes, it's pain. But my experience of it wasn't painful. It was a really very hard to describe, but there was this unpleasant sensation. So it wasn't really unpleasant. It was just, sure, it would have been nicer if it wasn't there at all, I think, but it was like so really difficult to describe a relationship to it, Leonard. Yeah. So any situation that we would call suffering, if we look at it, if we get into what the actual experience is and dismiss the stories about it, the whole thing is really different all the time. But of course, that's talking like we have the ability to do that. You know, whether we can or we don't, whether it happens or not, is really kind of like it's not up to us, is it? It just happens or not. So I don't feel like I've answered your question at all, but I don't know. I don't know. What do others think? What do you reckon, Tyler?
I wish I could remember the exact moment early in this meeting when that question came up. But
I'm just curious, Jeremy, the question, to ask you the question, is it okay for you to not want suffering? Is that okay with you?
Yes.
Yesterday, I felt like there is like an avoidance pattern and distracting myself, and I felt like a huge pull to the story and the narrative, and um, I felt like I'm unable to just move. I'm just on this train and I'm watching it and I'm not controlling it. And I'm just sucked into this narrative and this pattern. And then I shifted from it and I sit with the sensations, and the opposite happens. I become sucked into the sensations. The sensation I was running away from become delicious, really. And I felt like I don't want to move from the sensations. And it's like I'm one side to another side. It's kind of funny interesting to experience. So it's like there's part of us like it wants to continue. It doesn't matter with what experience, but just wants to continue. Even if it was suffering, uncomfortable. It's kind of weird.
You're
You're
muted,
muted,
Ben.
That's weird when you're muted and then you've got to say it all again. I had a really weird experience when you were saying that, Ramez, and it was like, I get that being contained, I get that, but I don't get it, but I feel like I do. When you said it, it was like, yeah. But I couldn't describe it. I couldn't, yes, that, that was a really weird experience. Yeah. And probably my experience is nothing at all like what you were describing, but yeah, it feels like being cradled. Here I am, I'm almost hugging myself as I'm talking about it. It feels like that, being contained, but not constricted, not in a bad way. No, feeling, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like, sounds woo woo, but feels like the universe is supporting me, kind of contained. Anyway, I'm not meaning to steal it from you.
I think it's quite different with chronic pain, and I don't know if you or Vince and you might be talking about chronic pain, but like sometimes with the IBS, it is just pain. It's
Yeah,
just
not
pain.
chronic, it's intense. Yeah, acute.
Yeah. So there's seems like there's no escape from it because it just is.
Yeah. Well, and of course, there's a much bigger desire to escape from acute pain.
Yeah. Like if you're having your leg chopped off.
Mm.
wouldn't ask the question that Jeremy posed, I suppose. And animals don't want pain, do they? They apparently can't think, but they still don't want pain. They don't have any psychological suffering, but the body will still veer away from it.
Mm. The difference with animals, apparently, and I have to say that underlined, is that when it's inevitable, seems to be an acceptance of it. And so that I would say animals experience pain but not suffering.
Yeah, because sometimes they like play dead, or they just surrender, don't they?
Surrender to it, yes.
In the mouth attacker.
But I wouldn't say they don't think either, you know. I mean, that's another presumption. We know that crows with a brain the size of our thumb can work out problems that are too difficult for people to work out. So, you know, yes. And when I
think what
say
my
the
question,
word, yeah, go on.
sorry, Vin. Something one of you just said had this click in me that I think is underlying my question. And that that I have this either belief or assumption that all wants and desires are something to get rid of, to shed.
Oh.
And that I believe that it's okay to want to be free from suffering.
So are you talking about when you are suffering or when you're not suffering?
I don't know that I was looking at it I think I'm looking at just more of in general, in that accepting if there's an experience that either now or in the past that I would interpret as, I like this distinction of like psychological suffering. Like there's something that's happening right now, either physically or that I'm observing, that I don't want. And so there's some like resistance to what's actually happening. And that resistance is what's contributing to the suffering. And that it's okay to not want to experience that. There's a distinction between not wanting what's happening to happen and not wanting to suffer from what's happening.
Jeremy,
And
when you're suffering, can you not suffer?
I love the way that you pose some of these questions. um, I can't control it in the moment.
Yeah, so like if you feel pain, can you not feel pain? You can't, right? And when you suffer, you can't not suffer. So if you want to not suffer, can you not want to not suffer?
It's reminding me of something. I was sharing some story a few weeks ago, and I had talked about how I had experienced something that in the past would have caused, or I would have also experienced stress and resistance, and it would have been a shit. I wish I could remember what it was now. But I remembered saying that I didn't have any control over whether or not I experienced that suffering in the moment. It's just that it just didn't happen.
Yeah. Is it okay that it didn't happen?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So is it okay to not want to suffer?
Yeah.
Or is it okay when the suffering is happening?
I think what's interesting is that I was about to either say that I only suffer when I'm not when I'm not aware that suffering is happening, and it's only after I have that subtle shift in perspective. It's like, oh, look what's happening right now. I'm going in circles in my head. And as soon as I saw that I was going in circles in my head or ruminating, that I realized that I was suffering and that the suffering is not, well, I don't think that's true. I think in the moment I'm experiencing suffering. I'm not sure what to say.
So how about this question? If something exists in this instant, is it also possible for it to not exist in the same instant?
No.
No. So if the next instant there is realization that there is suffering happening, is it possible to not realize in the same instant that suffering is happening? And if in the next instant suffering is not there, theoretically because of the realization that happened a moment ago, is it also possible to change that? And is there anywhere in those snapshots of those instants where there is any actual okayness or not okayness about it? Or is that just a post-it note on reality? Thank you, Penilla. See, part of what you were locked into there was this idea of continuity. And if you break it down to reality, there is no continuity. What there is this instant, and now this instant, and that last instant had nothing to do with this instant. They were just independent instances that consistently occur, but there is no continuity. That's just another overlay. And if you look at it that way, you can do absolutely nothing about what exists. It exists and that's it, full stop.
I wouldn't even say there are instances.
Yep.
There's just this instance and the thought of other instances
Mm.
in this instance.
Yep. In this instance, a thought too, by the time we realise it.
I think the thoughts that are arising is that we've gotten to a point with this that in a way is the reason for my question. If I'm experiencing something where I have thoughts that tell me that there's continuity or that this is just the same thing is happening again, and now I'm getting lost in thoughts and I'm stressed, I'm worried. There's something that is causing me suffering that isn't actually present when I am present, for lack of a word. Like if I actually look, it's not there. But before I looked, I was trapped in it.
What comes up for me
But,
here is that I'm never suffering the pain or what's happening. I'm suffering the separate self, the one that believes what's happening, that it means something, that there's a person suffering it. And I'm suffering all the attachments, the overlay of what's happening. That's the suffering. I'm not suffering the IBS pain. I'm suffering whatever overlay comes with that. Which sometimes I see and sometimes I don't. So it's intense suffering when I can't see it. But that's all I'm ever suffering, really, is that illusionary me. The one that thinks it's in pain.
I would say the story that it could be different, that we can end it, get out of it, change it, whatever. That's where the suffering is. Up until that point, it's just pain.
Yeah, like for me, it's the additions to that. Well, it might kill me. It could be something more serious. It might turn to cancer. Blah, de, blah, de, blah.
Mm. They're all extras, yeah.
But if I were able to question the one beneath all that, the belief in that, wouldn't that be the way, Vince?
Well, if we talk like we're describing what is actual rather than what if, we would say things like, if the thought arises that we might describe as a realization of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way Jeremy put it, I think. Then that changes everything the moment that thought turns up. But it either happens or it doesn't happen.
True.
It's not a case of we're able to make it happen, but we can put ourselves in the way of it happening by getting skillful at it, by practicing. But yeah.
So if the question's, is it okay for you? Is it okay for me to not want suffering? Then the question really is there really a someone?
No, the question really is there a not wanting suffering, or is it not there, or is it there? If not wanting suffering is there, then that's it. It's not a case of is there a person who's experiencing that. That's just another overlay. I don't know if there's a person there. I would say there's not a person there, but that's another story. That's beside the point. Is there a not wanting to suffer there? If there is, it's there, full stop. There's no okay or not okay, good or bad, right or wrong. There is just, there it is, if it's there.
So wouldn't inquiring or getting underneath that be relevant then, to go underneath that and say,
if it happens?
wouldn't
Of
that be the
course.
skillful? Wouldn't that be the skillful means that you're talking about?
Yeah. But again, we might want that to happen. We might think that, we might see that that's a way of changing things and so on. But the reality is, does it happen or not?
Yeah, because I'm seeing that now, but when I'm in the pain, you're saying it might not come into my mind to say,
That's right.
who is the one
Yeah.
who doesn't want this to happen or this to be here? Who is the one that's resisting? That kind of thing. I wonder why we don't remember that. It's weird, isn't it? I hear it enough from Angela.
Yeah, because we're pretty involved in it. But I wouldn't even suggest that that's the best way to go. The best way to go is to ask yourself, what am I getting out of it? If it's here, there's some benefit for it. What is that benefit? That's more the direction I'd be looking, rather than say who is experiencing it, as a way of trying to get rid of the experience. The experience is there. Make the most of it. We don't want these things to finish until we realize why they're there.
I think the thing underlying all this is that what Vince is getting at is that there's the idea that there's something other than this, and that largely is what causes suffering, because there's this and you don't like it. You think there's something else. There could be something else. Try to get that. But when you look, there isn't. It's just this. So what are you looking for? What's the okayness or not okayness? You want something or you don't want something, doesn't change a thing.
And there's an irony in it too, and that is that with acceptance of what is there, And of course, we're really only talking about unpleasantness when we need to accept. It's not at all difficult to accept something that's very pleasant, but with acceptance of anything that's unpleasant, it will change. Which of course is another story until it's experienced.
It will change, but it might come back.
Sure.
And isn't the root of all suffering, at the core of it, the idea of a separate self that needs to be tackled to cure everything?
No.
You know there's not a separate self. Why is that? Why are we even talking about that?
Because I think, or what comes up anyway, is that we're so conditionally trained into believing it, that there is one, and fall into neuro pathways or patterns with that, then it might take something to align that in your everyday life where situations occur. And there's almost like an amnesia or loss of
I get what you're saying there. Yeah. So when we were talking before and we were saying that self only exists for you when you're in pain or when you're suffering, otherwise it doesn't exist. Right? But we're not actually talking about a self, are we? We're not talking about an actual self. We're talking about a sense of self. I hope we answered your question, Jeremy. He's gone. Yeah. But we're not talking about an actual self, are we? Well, you know that doesn't exist, right? So when you say I need to remind myself that there's no self there, you're just telling yourself that idea, that sense of self that you've got when you're in pain, isn't based on a reality. Would you put it that way?
I think there are patterns that will keep running, like IBS or whatever patterns we get into with in relationships or with friends, or habitual patterns from conditioning and beliefs. And until those are seen through, then
Yeah, I would change that. I would change that just to say until they are no longer needed or are no longer of value. Right. So that might happen without actually seeing through them. Hi, Scott.
Did I say something? Everybody's leaving. Take it personally. I'll be in suffering now after this meeting.
Well, that will be an opportunity for you.
Oh, don't worry, I do get plenty of them. I didn't say just pain, it's their triggers, like being on this Zoom meeting. Many times I'm triggered into suffering.
So, and you don't know if suffering is gonna happen or not. And are you worried? Are you worrying about suffering arising?
I think I can go into a pattern of that. It's sometimes not there, but there is a pattern because there's certain habitual patterns that have been around a while that seem to keep coming back. So there's still a belief in continuity.
What about now?
As soon as you say that, no, no, there isn't. I think there's a belief in continuity. I just need you here all the time, Tyler, so you can say things like that and bring me right back to the present. No.
I can't relate to the non-continuity thing. What do you mean by saying there is no continuity?
Right now, in this present moment, there isn't, is there? Unless I think about it. When Tyler asked me that question, there's just space. It's like, no, immediately.
If you had no memory, or you couldn't imagine the future, would there be continuity? Or does continuity entirely rely on your mental capacity for memory and fantasy?
Yeah, it relies on
Yeah,
thoughts, belief.
I understand it's a thought, but what do you mean that it's not there? Like, I know it's a thought. When you say there's no continuity, in my mind is like, what even that, you know? Like, what's the opposite of continuity?
Mm. Mm. Like there's no such thing as continuity because it's conceptual.
Yeah.
What's the opposite of that?
It's not an opposite, not an issue of an opposite. And it's another story, but a way to see things in a non-continuous way is to recognize that you have to have artificial snapshots of this. My mouth wants to say this moment, but of course that's not a moment. That this comes into being and goes out of being constantly, but it's where it comes from and where it goes to doesn't exist. I can only imagine it, and I can only and my memory is my imagination as well. So if you imagine that we can actually, which we can't, but we could, if we could actually snapshot this moment and freeze it and examine it, then that's the only reality. But of course, by the time we actually took the snapshot and looked at it, it's already just a memory. But to imagine that there is a past running into the present or a present running into the future, that's just a huge story, isn't it? And that's what you would have to have in order to have continuity.
You know, Vince, I'd go even further to say that without memory and without being able to imagine the future, there would also largely be no suffering.
Yes, I'll get with that one for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that I think somewhere I picked up that the Buddha said that all suffering has to do with desire, and desire is always about the future. But I can get things wrong when I paraphrase them, but that makes sense to me, for sure.
Yeah, that's a difficult one when you're in acute pain, isn't it? Because yeah, I suppose if it's just pain or just pain on its own, where's the desire to get out of it? It's just pain, isn't it?
And it's a really difficult one. I mean, I did a lot of Vipassana once upon a time back when I was a seeker, and it's a big part of Vipassana that you sit cross-legged for an hour straight without moving, and that inevitably brings on considerable pain to do that. It's amazing how much pain can come from sitting still for an hour, and it was encouraged that you immersed yourself in the sensation that you caused pain, that you called pain, and you would experience that changing quite amazingly from something you call pain into something else entirely. It would transmute by simply staying with it. And the reality is that in our society, we have learned just to run away from it in every which way we can. So to turn around now, I'm not saying to do that, because it is quite difficult to do, but it is an experience that is really interesting, that you go into the pain and you don't try and get rid of it, and you immerse yourself in it, and it will change into something else that you wouldn't call pain. But that's yeah, that's pretty weird stuff.
And when there is acute pain, can there not be acute pain?
No. No, but it's a bit like Vince said, it depends, the pain varies in degrees to, in a way, the amount of going into it. I can go into it so far with IBS, but when it becomes acute, that's when it gets to be a problem. But then there was a time recently that I went into I felt the center of it, and I was just experimenting. So in my imagination, it was holding the inner child's pain. And that time it kind of dissolved, and I would say it dissolved into love. But I've not been able to do it since then. So I don't know what that was, or whether it was significant or not.
Well, I'm not talking about being with it until it changes or having it dissolve. I mean that it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, well, a lot of times that's how it is. There's just nothing, literally nothing I can do. Tablets don't work, it's just there.
So does that also then, does acceptance of it occur?
I think the only time there's acceptance is the time I just described, but I think the other times there's always something. Maybe there's bits of acceptance at times, maybe, but if I've had it for, like this time it was 2 weeks, then it gets quite desperately wanting to it to be over.
Tiresome. Yeah.
It wears you down. And then it seems that the suffering becomes more then. Is that what you're asking me, Tyler?
I don't know.
A difficult one with pain, and especially acute pain. A difficult one. I find myself exploring it a bit more now and watching
So
it.
one thing that comes to mind that you could explore when it happens is to separate out the suffering and the pain, to see if you can see what is suffering and what is just pure pain. The sensation, the pure sensation that you're describing as pain, and then what extra is put onto that you call suffering. That would be a good exploration, I think.
An example would be like if you had a pain that didn't change and was there for 2 weeks, and it's the same sensation 2 weeks in versus 5 seconds in. How much more suffering is there when you're 2 weeks into it? But has the experience changed at all?
Well, it does change along the way. It can peak and then it can go slow, or it can peak and then it can go, but then it can come back. There's no rhyme or reason to what it's doing. Doesn't seem to do.
Does the suffering follow that graph of intensity, or does the suffering increase like a line over time? And in 2 weeks in,
No, it follows that path. It can be extreme one day, not another, extreme another day, it's up and down. I
But
can think it comes back. I don't know if I'm answering the question correctly.
What you mentioned a moment ago, I think, is what Tyler's alluding to, and you said it gets, I think you said exhausting. I was thinking, so that would suggest that there is a build-up of something that is not the actual pain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That's a good point, Matt. Thank you. There's a build-up of the one that wants it to go. So the one's there and being patient with it and tolerating it and exploring it and this and that and doing what it needs to do. And then so that's probably always there. And then towards the end of it, the suffering self peaks on top of the pain and says, right, that's it now. I'm not having this anymore. It's too much. And that's when it's at its worst because of the suffering psychologically. It's hard, like Vince says, sometimes to sort out the two and see. I can sometimes see what the mind or the thinking's doing separate from the pain, the psychological stuff, but then sometimes they fuse together, or it seems they do when it's acute.
it is very hard.
Are you saying, Tyler, that the are you saying that are you saying that's what's suffering, the separate self or the thing that's on top of it? What was the point of your question? It was a good question, bro, didn't it?
I guess it was just to help you see the difference between pain and suffering and how intense suffering can be and how much suffering can change when the experience, the sensation is more or less the same. Like if you have diarrhea and you really gotta take a shit and it's at the gate and you're driving home and you know it's a 20-minute drive home,
Mm.
and how much more suffering is there 5 minutes into the drive versus when you open the toilet door when you're home,
Mm.
even if it's the same sensation.
I love the analogy, but yeah, I think it feels like at the beginning there's lots of space, and then the contraction starts happening, and gradually it gets tighter and tighter, and the pain gets tighter and tighter with that contraction.
Sure.
So when you want to go home to the toilet, you're in the car, it's not a big deal. And then gradually as you go along in the car, it becomes more and more of a big deal. The intensity and the desperation for it to go, to get out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think what adds to that is what the mind's doing with it as well. I think possibly if you could just relax, which Vince talks to me about a lot, then it wouldn't be as intense.
I think all of it is what the mind is saying about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
Oh,
something feels unbearable, I think it's helpful for that seeing the difference between pain and suffering to have a way that you can quiet the mind and go straight to the sensation and then question, not even question, just notice that you are bearing it. It isn't unbearable because it's there.
Mhm. Yeah. That's absolutely true. And in the absolute, that's absolutely true. In real time, what my experience is that in a sense is my teacher, because each time it's some it's how much I can just stay in the sensation without bouncing back to the mind. And that bouncing back is the suffering, until there's a snap comes, and then I can't bounce back at all. The mind's just like, and I got me in a fix. That's how it seems, but obviously that's not true. But if I had to put it into words.
Once I was doing some work with someone and I was thinking, I'm kind of walking on a thin rope of trying not to fall into identification or bypassing the emotions. And she told me, sometimes you have to fall. And that just hit me like, it's not you, the one who's trying to maintain awareness of something or identification. You are neither the one who identified or the one who's not identified.
Mm. Yeah,
And
that's great.
sometimes you have to experience the identification to see that it is not you. It's not you doing it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I want to hear from Dennis before we finish up tonight. So I'm really intrigued, Dennis. Have you been cleaning your toenails?
No, Vince, no. There's a sort of a healing numbness in my right leg that I've been dealing with for a while.
So you're just easing that when you're bending forward.
Yeah.
And so earlier you were looked like you were just about asleep, or you were asleep, but then after that you were jiggling. Was it your right foot you were jiggling to try and keep the circulation going?
No, what I've noticed lately with doing TRE, when I first started a couple of, well, let's say 6 months ago, 5 months ago, it was very much in the legs. And then once I got through the hips, it's in the upper body, chest. But just during the day, it just kicks off. TRE just kicks off. So I was kind of strongly shaking my legs. It was just a bit of TRE with the leg shaking.
Right. Mm. So has your experience been at work in the last week or so?
Yeah, it's been okay. It's work's been busy, so I know when we talked the last day about carrying in that sense of clarity into, the next day, or if I'm in work and things feel normal, just to notice the visual field. And I haven't had a lot of time, but I did a bit of work with it this morning and one of the other evenings. So I'm just working away at that, the visual field, and using it as a practice or a tool to see the subject object fall away. So it's a bit of a work in progress. But today, I felt like throughout the whole meeting, I was like oxygen to a flame. I was starving my ego by being quiet. And then I noticed an awful lot of, I wrote it down because I thought it was funny. Selfishness, very clear. My selfishness was just everywhere. This is all about me and me, and just really kind of swimming in my selfishness in this process.
And when you say selfishness, I presume there's a judgment about that there.
Not a judgment as of yet, just noticing it. There's selfishness. I can say, I suppose I could talk about the energies and the feelings and the sensations and even call them emotions, but then, like it's selfishness. I'm being selfish. I'm more concerned about me than others and all that sort of how we label it selfishness. But if I didn't label it the first hour and a half, I was just feeling restless, agitated, energetic. I wasn't connecting with the conversations. I felt separate. Yeah, I was bored for a long time. So that's kind of in the ballpark of the selfishness.
Mm-hmm. So is the
seeing that.
ego being satisfied now that you're talking?
No, I wouldn't say so. I'm keeping the ego on a tight leash.
I'd really like to know how you're doing that one.
It's wrapped up in love.
Good. Yeah. So when you look like you're asleep, you really were asleep, were you? Quite
No, I just close my eyes
disengaged?
and I'm just listening. It's just sound. It's just people talking, and in a way, you can be closer to the conversation that way. Just
Yep.
shut out the visual, shut out sensations, and just it's just people talking in the middle of my head. Let's put it that way. Uh,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
instead of them being out on the screen in front of me.
So
Um,
when you mentioned about playing with the visual field, the subject object thing, it occurred to me to mention that if you use sound, have a break from the visual and use sound for a moment. I mean, I'm not saying one or the other exclusively, but sound is a lot easier to work with than the visual field. Uh, and you might have some pretty remarkable experiences with if you do that. Play with the subject object nature of sound.
yeah, sound feels simpler in that. Like, I don't feel like I'm projecting sound outwards. That sound is coming from Vince on the camera out there. Sound is just in the space. It's being received or it's here. As with the visual, it's more the conditioning is
Yep,
different. It's
two-way
like
thing.
that
Yeah,
tree is
I get
over
that.
there, that person's over there, that thing's over there, and then to kind of to look. What I was doing was following sort of an Angelo talk where he's saying just experience the wider field and just notice everything is just colors and whatever, and then notice like a tree up the way, and it creates the subject object. And I was like, what's being added as well as the visual? And what I straight away noticed was sensation, contraction in the face, twitching of muscles, a straining of the eye is giving something extra is being added. And then if there is thought, they're very, very subtle, or they're not kind of overt thoughts that's maybe adding something as well. But it was really clear to see the addition of a sensation of a contraction, muscle twitch, eye strain to create the illusion of something over there,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't there when you're looking at the wider field.
Yep,
So that's what I mean by
exactly. Yeah,
playing around with it.
sure.
Where the
Yeah,
sound always feels like it's happening inside me anyway.
yeah. So just with sound, and you're not going to get the same kind of effect, but one of the things to notice with sound has how it bleeds from the hearing into the feeling. Watch when it becomes neither your ears nor your body, or when it becomes sensation as much as it is as it is hearing. Yeah. But with the visual one again, the next step is to, with that subtle contraction of going out from your forehead to the object, look for something coming back from the object to you and see if it doesn't arrive at a different position in your body, a different place to your forehead. It's again, it's really the same feeling, but it'll come back from the object to you, but probably hit you somewhere differently.
Yeah, I've heard that mentioned before, but do you spoil it by giving me an example? Does that spoil the revelation? Like, does it come back to the heart, to the toe?
Well, it's everybody's different, but it's much more likely to come back and hit you in the chest than it is to hit you back in the forehead, you know.
Yeah, I was sensing that. That's why I said the heart.
Mm.
Yeah, I'll play with that one. I haven't played with that.
So
Does the
you
contraction
go on.
needs to disappear or change for the non-dual experience to be clear?
So I just
I
noticed
can't
there is
answer
a
that.
contraction.
Mm.
And I noticed sometimes when I was doing it a couple of weeks ago that there was thoughts that was creating the out there. So thoughts aren't as prevalent now, but contractions and sensations are still operating as an added piece to the visual field. So my experience is still my experience. It hasn't turned into 2D. There hasn't been a shift. So I don't know. I mean, I imagine at some point if something changed, I'd be able to talk about it in a more global way, but I don't have any other information than my experience.
You may not get that 2D thing, only some people get that, but that's beside the point. No, the recognition that you are creating the world with your thoughts. You're defining objects and giving them objectivity with the labels, etc., that occur with that projection. That's what you're after with this. It's, whether it's 2D or not, it's almost irrelevant.
Yeah, and
is the sensation or the contraction irrelevant, or because it seems like it's what my mind referencing for a subject? So does it have to change, or?
Well, no, there is your revelation in that you are creating subjectivity with your mind. There's your revelation. You're seeing that. Just as you may not have yet seen that you create objectivity with your mind as well. But the fact that you see that thing coming back to you is what might give you the sense of subjectivity, whereas you're experiencing that from the beginning. See, so everybody does it differently, of course. And so Dennis has recognized objectivity first, and subjectivity will follow. You've seen subjectivity first, but you're seeing how subjectivity is created. Not how in terms of reason or anything, but in terms of experience. You're seeing it in terms of experience. That's the big thing.
I was walking at one point and noticing arms swinging and trees passing by, but there was that real sense of I don't move. Whatever this is subjectively, it's not moving. It's just everything is just
the world is coming
past
and through you. Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's part of the same experience. Yeah. And one experience I had on the day following I woke up was that as I walked, the ground came up to meet my feet. That was an experience that I had, quite psychedelic. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that one. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'll keep playing around with that stuff, and maybe that'll have an effect in some way that other practices may.
It already has, by the sound of it. Okay, well, I'm 5 to midnight here. It's time for me to go to bed.
Night, everyone.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you very much.